believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? I'm back. Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Vendesals, and host Ricky Brands, and a great episode. Today we have an amazing guest, author, journalist, researcher, documentary filmmaker, Jack Roth. And the cool thing about doing this podcast is now that the show has really grown throughout the years, and I've networked with a lot of people, I have a lot of people actually reaching out to me to come on the show, and I get exposed to some amazing guests like Jack. And Jack joins us to talk about his new book, Killing Kennedy, exposing the plot, the cover-up, and the consequences. But we also get into some of the other topics that he has done a lot of research on and written books about, like ETs, UFOs, and those type of cover-ups. So it's a fascinating discussion and a really fun one where we start off talking about historical events like the cover-up of the JFK assassination, and then slowly we get to current events and we start talking about some of the other cover-ups throughout history, like Roswell and some of the current stuff that's going on with the ETs and shooting down the UFOs and all that type of stuff. So a lot of exposing government cover-ups. It's a fun discussion, everything from assassinations to aliens. I know you're going to enjoy this. And if you do enjoy this, remember this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of this discussion or any of the great discussions I bring to you, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial. If you're not in a good financial situation, I know many of us aren't, please just consider subscribing, reviewing. Subscribe to us on all of audio and video platforms: Ron, Rumble, Rockfin, BitChute, Odyssey, Band.video, and also iTunes and Spotify. And you can find all this and much more on our website, therippleeffectpodcast.com. And you can also find all the ways to financially support the show if you can financially support the show. And some of the ways of doing so is supporting us on Patreon, where you can support us monthly. And if you support us with as little as $1 a month, you can participate in our monthly Patreon podcast, which is a podcast I do with my Patreon supporters, and I release it as an episode. So it's a great way of getting on the show, connecting with myself, connecting with other listeners of the show, and no donation is too little. So if a small percentage of you guys donated as little as $1 a month on Patreon, it would be enough to do the show full time. So please, no donation is too little. You can also donate via Venmo. You can send a one-time donation via PayPal. You can also send us crypto, Ethereum, Bitcoin, all that type of stuff. We have an amazing merch store with hoodies, t-shirts, a lot of the gear that you see me wearing on the show, or mugs you see me drinking out of. This is all stuff you can purchase on my merchandise store, which is the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com, or you can find the link on my website or in the show description. But if you want to go directly to the merchandise store, go to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. You can also tip this episode or any of the episodes you enjoy on Rockfin. It's a video platform. All these episodes are there for free, so you can listen or watch Ripple Effect Podcast on Rockfin. And just by watching and streaming the Ripple Effect Podcast there, you're contributing to the Ripple Effect Podcast. And like I said, you can also tip a specific episode if you're enjoying it. And we also have some amazing sponsors, one being the University of Reason, which was created by Richard Grove. If you're at a crossroad in life, please consider checking out the University of Reason. By using the link on my website or in the show description, you can sign up and support yourself and support the Ripple Effect Podcast at the same time. You can also check out Content Safe, which is how I get all my videos on all the different video platforms I'm on. All I have to do is upload my videos and my thumbnails and my description, all that information to one channel, and he syncs that one channel to all my channels. So it saves me tons of uploading time. If you're a podcaster, streamer, YouTuber, please consider checking out Content Safe. Tell Matt at Content Safe that you're listening to Ripple Effect Podcast, and he'll definitely hook you up. Another sponsor is Element Electrolytes, and it's a great, healthy way of staying in ketosis, staying in fasting if you're doing those type of diets, and still staying hydrated. It's very difficult to find a healthy way of staying hydrated. Most drinks that you buy at a gas station, convenience store, you order is full of artificial sweeteners or sugar, artificial colors, and Element Electrolytes created by Rob Wolf has none of that. It only has the things you need. It has potassium, sodium, magnesium. They use a stevia leaf to sweeten it, so a natural alternative to sugar. It's a natural sweetener, and it tastes amazing. It's a great way of staying hydrated, and it can help with a lot of symptoms due to dehydration, like fatigue, muscle soreness, headaches, all those type of things. A lot of times you can have symptoms that are due to dehydration and not even know it. So please check out Element Electrolytes. You get a gift with every purchase when you use the Ripple Effect Podcast link in the show description or on my website. So please use that link in the show description or on my website. Check out all the other links to all the other ways you can support the show. Enjoy this amazing conversation with author, journalist, documentary filmmaker, Jack Roth, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. This is a topic I love. I've covered quite a bit throughout the years. I've done some roundtable discussions with James D'Eugenio and others in Morley and some of the other ones in this realm. It's a topic I haven't hit on in a long time, so it's fun to kind of dive back into it. It is one of those rabbit holes that there is no end to the rabbit hole. There's constantly just more things to discover and so many different perspectives and witnesses and great researchers out there constantly exposing stuff. But I guess to jump right into it, for people who are listening, who might not know some of your work, because this isn't the only type of topic that you've done, and you've done other types of work, journalism and all that type of stuff. So can you give a little bit of your origin story, a little bit of your background, and maybe eventually lead that story into what led you to want to do do a JFK book when there's already been a lot of books out there, obviously, but what you thought you could bring to the subject and why it's important to constantly discuss it?
Absolutely. Yes. I think, listen, like a lot of people, I was born in 1965, so it was 2 years after the Kennedy assassination, but I kind of grew up in the aftermath of it, like kind of with the ripple effects, right? Like the counterculture movement, Richard Nixon, Watergate, a distrust of government institutions that started after the Kennedy assassination. So I was always interested in it. And when I was a teenager, I remember being very much like, wait a minute. So Jack Ruby walks into a police station with, dozens of police officers escorting Oswald, and he walks right up to him and shoots him and kills him. To me, that screamed that there was something not right, and that was a conspiracy and it was a cover-up. It was obvious. Just using critical thinking skills, right? So I was like, okay, and that's all I tell people now. That's all they need to know. It's like there's so much more, but if you just think about Jack Ruby, that's all you really need to think about. So, I my background's journalism and filmmaking as well, and at a certain point, I was about 3 years ago, right when COVID started, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I was like, I really want to do something. I've always been interested in this. I think I can write a good book. And he said, well, he says, you got to ask yourself, what book can you write that hasn't already been written? There's so many books out there. And that fascinated me. And my whole thing with that, because he made me think. And I said, that's a good question. So we started to talk about it, and there were different themes that started to develop. The idea of ripple effects, why it still matters, present day relevance, people's history, if you will, the kind of the cost of that kind of conspiracy. So these themes came up. I said, you know what? I said, I'm good at interviewing people, and I think I can find the right people to interview for this book. I'll just do a bunch of interviews and make it like a people's history, but get the right people to interview and ask them the right questions. So I started with, reaching out to a few people I knew who were kind of in that community, that I knew had gone to some of the conferences or what have you. And one thing led to another, and everything started to fall into place. And one interview led to another interview. And as I started kind of putting this, formalizing this in my head, it's like, okay, what's going to be good for the readers? And I thought, if I present these interviews, and I did them in sections, different parts. So, for example, the first part's researchers. And that's just, I interviewed researchers who have written books about the topic. And there's another part that's, my father was in the CIA. So all four of those people's fathers were in the CIA in 1963. So it was just putting together a narrative, something that would be really compelling for people. And I also wanted to humanize it. So I wanted these people's stories and their journeys to be what the book was about. And then for readers to be able to take that. And then if they wanted to do a deep dive into a specific area, they could do that.
Yeah, and there's some people that are directly connected to the story that are still alive. I interviewed Abraham Bolden a long time ago when I started podcasting, and I mean, his story is just insane. And it's insane that a lot of people don't even know who he is, and he should be like a historic figure. And, if people haven't seen any interviews with him, he also wrote the book, was it the Echoes from Daily Plaza? No, what was his? It might have been the Echoes from Daily Plaza. I'm not sure what his book was, but he ended up writing a book. But his story is insane, and he was the first Black Secret Service agent on a presidential detail. The Secret Service was very racist. He talked about it, about how they didn't like Kennedy because of what they thought was his liking to the minorities of the country and whatnot. And but to hear somebody who was like directly involved, has pictures with Kennedy, I think he was thrown into the laundry room like detail, and then Kennedy walks in just like happenstance and ends up like just having a little chit chat with him. They shook hands, and then he ends up directing the Secret Service to put him on his detail. So it's fascinating, all that stuff. But he also exposes that there was a plot. Was it Chicago maybe initially?
Chicago.
Yeah, that they found somebody there, and they didn't know who he was and whatnot. So that might have been connected, or that might have been maybe plan A, and maybe what we know what happened was plan B. So it's fascinating, but there's all these fascinating people, and each one of them shine a different light on the story, and it just seems like such a complex story. But like you said, even if you just simplify it to how possible is it that the guy who supposedly shot Kennedy gets shot, and then somebody shoots him, and then he dies in prison? It's like, if you just put it at that level, it seems kind of hard to believe. And that was a crazy time, because I mean, with the Robert Kennedy Jr. assassination, or Robert Kennedy assassination, and you look at Malcolm X, you look at Martin Luther King, like it was just like insane, the amount of very suspicious assassinations around that time. When you were diving deep into this story to write the book, and I'm sure you probably dove deep into it in the past because you're fascinated with it, but was there any new things that came out that kind of stuck out? You're like, wow, I didn't know this, or I didn't know that.
Yeah, there was a lot for me, and I thought that I'd read so much, right, over the years about JFK, and try to read, as many books as I could, and kind of follow things as because over the years now there have been new documents that have come out. Thank goodness for the Freedom of Information Act, right? But they're being spoon fed, and they're also very much redacted. I like to, like it's 90% blacked out, and there's only a couple words that you could read. It's like, what good is that, right? So the CIA isn't going to give you anything that it doesn't want to give us. So, but yeah, I mean, I learned it, depending on who I spoke to, I pretty much learned something interesting from each person. A couple examples. I learned an awful lot about just, for example, Lyndon Johnson as a human being, uh, just how crazy and this person was. And, you talk, because a lot of it got into the psychology of why people do the things they do, right? So why people in power act the way they do. Who would have done this? Who would have killed the president like this in broad daylight, and not a lone gunman, but a conspiracy of people who were intelligent, high level, yet they were capable of doing this. Well, why? Right? What makes people the way they are? So I learned an awful lot about the psychology of the assassination, and not only just basically about the people who would do this, the Alan Dulleses of the world, the Curtis LeMays, the James Jesus Angletons, and of the CIA. And it's like, what, and Lyndon Johnson, there's a sociopathy associated with it. And I think that's really interesting for people to understand, because I think people look at things a certain way, but if you really can't understand history unless you understand human nature. I learned this a long time ago. And if you don't understand human nature and you don't put that element of human nature into history, then you'll never understand it. What motivates people? What percentage of us are literally would be diagnosed as a sociopath or a psychopath or a megalomaniac? Any of these things, and why, and what a certain amount of people that reach very high levels a lot of times have these traits. So like just that alone, I did this whole section on the psychology, philosophy, and social perspectives, and I interviewed some psychologists about it. So that was one thing I learned that was just blew my mind. It's like, well, you really have to look at this. You have to look at the people involved and why they did what they did. Also, you have to realize and put a lot more emphasis. Again, when you're looking at it, just looking outside in, you have to understand the Cold War, and you have to understand the Cold Warriors who were, created as a result of the Cold War and World War II. So you have this very cold warrior mindset in the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and their attitude is, bomb Russia, bomb Cuba, we'll deal with the collateral damage. They did not care. It was very much that way. And Kennedy was like, he was shocked. He was like, I can't believe I'm dealing with this. And that was one of the things that was, people don't realize, when he was elected in 60, he soon learned what he was dealing with. Once the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs happened, and he knew he was lied to by Alan Dulles. I mean, he was like, wait, I'm the president. And yet these people really had a lot more power than he did. And I think that was one of the lessons he learned. That was the second thing. I would say the third thing, maybe the most important thing, was what I learned about Lee Harvey Oswald, and the little things, the things. I think one thing I was able to do in this book that I'm really proud of is kind of show Lee Harvey Oswald as a human being, not as either a patsy or a lone gunman. So whatever you believe on those, but that's all people think, he's either that or that, and there's no human being there whatsoever. And I was able to talk to people who knew him, and that was the most, I don't want to say surprising, but enlightening. I think important for everyone to understand that Lee Harvey Oswald was a highly intelligent person. He was a U.S. intelligence asset. He was a CIA asset, naval intelligence asset. He was good at spycraft. That's very important. 3, he was a good person. He loved kids. It's like the opposite of what we were just talking about with the Abraham Bolden. He was all for, he used to walk on buses and go sit in the back because he didn't want, he's like, that's ridiculous that black people have to sit in the back of a bus. I'm going to go back there too. So he was a very interesting person, and he was a patriot. He was ordered to do all these things, and basically he did them. So they were sheep dipping him. They were telling him to go to New Orleans, then Dallas, blah, blah, blah. He was just doing his job. So what I learned about Oswald is, again, as a person, I think is really insightful. And when people read that, they're going to be like, wow, this is not the guy that the mainstream media has portrayed for the last 60 years.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like we just look at historic figures as like their events or the events that they were a part of is what uh we think defines them, right? And rarely do people go back and try to humanize them and try to figure out, okay, outside of this event that made them famous or a historic figure, who were they as people? And like you said before, kind of getting into that psychology is also a piece to the puzzle, because then you also start understanding what motivates them, their wants, desires, who were they, the people around them, and you can get a better idea of like what really happened and what they were capable of or not capable of, or what was possible and not was what was not possible. So yeah, that's definitely a important piece of the puzzle. And there's a lot of characters in this story. I mean, LBJ, I had Roger Stone on. I think the first time Roger Stone was on my show years ago was right after he wrote his LBJ book about the Kennedy assassination. And it was a fascinating book because it really was a part of the story that kind of was neglected a little bit. Just how bad of a person LBJ really was, and how, and just how the whole thing went down. I mean, really, when you think of like, if you're a detective, one of the things you look at is like motive. That's always one of the first things. Well, LBJ had a lot of motive because he got to be president without ever having to win a vote. And so he obviously had motive. A lot of people also don't know that the Kennedys and LBJ really didn't get along. It was more about getting that Southern vote, and that's why he was on there. Mm-hmm. There's also rumors that LBJ wasn't going to be on Kennedy's next card, that Robert Kennedy was going to be his vice president. So there was a lot. And then there's also some scandals that LBJ was a part of that was, him becoming president helped, push underneath the rug. So it's funny because it's like, when people say history is written by the winners, it's so true. And there's so many examples of it where like who Kennedy really was, or who LBJ really was, and how history talks about him is so drastically different. But most people, if you don't do a deep dive into these topics, like your perception of reality or who these people were is completely molded by, like you said, mainstream media. And same thing with Lee Harvey Oswald. It's like they've painted him as this awful person who hated Kennedy and all this stuff. And same thing with Jack Ruby, like this mobster really gave a shit about politics. Like he didn't care, and the crazy thing is what people don't realize is there's still, even though it was a long time ago, there's still video evidence of a lot of shady stuff. I mean, there's a video of the Secret Service guy getting asked to get off the back of the bumper of the car right before they took the final turn. There's video evidence of Oswald saying, like, I'm a patsy, or not even knowing why he was arrested, right? And he got arrested at a movie theater, which seemed really unusual. Like, you got arrested at a movie theater and you just killed don't you think there's a better spot to hide? And so that was really suspicious. And then there's the lesser known video of Jack Ruby. It's saying that, like, this goes to the highest levels and all this stuff, and that's all brushed underneath it. I'm like, there's so much evidence. So when people still say, and I've seen Rogan have conversations with guests sometimes, and they're like, oh yeah, no, I don't believe it was first of all, it was a conspiracy, because regardless which story you believe, it was a conspiracy. It was either a solo shooting or it was much more complex, but either way, it was a conspiracy. But people who still believe that there was one shooter, it's mind-boggling with just the amounts of evidence. But for people who are listening and like, okay, I've read this many books, I've seen a lot of documentaries, but why is it still important? Why is this story? And what do you think? Because I always say, like, we have a better understanding of the present when you follow your steps backwards and learn the history that led you here. And I think that JFK assassination is very similar. Like, there's a lot of issues that we have today that kind of leads back to the Kennedy assassination. But in your opinion, what is it about the story that you think still deserves attention and is relevant?
And that's probably the most important question we can ask, because I know a lot of younger kids Well, they know who JFK is, maybe, but we don't learn history anymore. So like we're not taught history so much anymore. So people just don't care. And here's why it matters. In 1963, the year Kennedy was killed, there was this ideology known as American exceptionalism. And American exceptionalism was this idea that we're the best. We were the good guys. The United States, we were exceptional. We were the only country in the world that provided this for its citizens. And if a man had a job, he could support his wife and family and have a house. And, you remember coming through the 50s, we were the heroes in World War II. So from World War II through 1963, it was American exceptionalism. We were the good guys. We wore the white hats, period. Well, Kennedy is killed. And from that moment on, that ideology of American exceptionalism has eroded slowly but surely. And it started pretty quickly. Because people were angry, and whether or not there were people, you hear like, oh, this percentage said they didn't believe it. This percentage of people, they always do those polls. But there's also a lot of people that really suffered. It was a trauma for the whole country. First of all, total trauma. Basically, watching this on live TV, right? So there's something called cognitive dissonance, and I bring this up because it's very important. We don't want to believe that our government would be capable, or the CIA elements in our government would be capable of doing such a horrible thing and killing Kennedy, because it's simply too difficult to come to terms with. It makes us feel too uncomfortable. We want to look at our government as father figure. They're always going to protect us. They're always going to do what's in our best interest. But if you think that the CIA and other elements of the government actually killed Kennedy, then all that goes away. And it's the discomfort level for a lot of people is way too much to deal with. So you have that going on. And then, but what happens? Boom, right into the Vietnam War, which was one of the main reasons that they wanted to be in that war. Johnson gave them that war. They made billions of dollars. General Dynamics, Bell Helicopter, all these bigwigs, they made fortunes on the Vietnam War. And then you have Nixon, Watergate. Well, first of all, you have Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Bobby all being killed. By the time the 60s and early 70s rolled around, people were disgusted. They couldn't believe what was. Their heads were spinning. So all of that went away. No more American exceptionalism. And again, keep going forward. Perpetual wars, perpetual scandals, Iran-Contra, whatever you want to, whatever it is. And behind it all are these very powerful people, and people say, well, who, listen, Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA, right? You can look at people, and he certainly was involved, but he had his overlords. So I tell people that, listen, these are just very powerful elitist people with elitist attitudes. And that was something else I learned. But anyway, it matters because everything has changed since that day. And we're never going to heal from that event until we come to terms with the truth of it. The truth comes out and we come to terms with it and deal with it as a country. We don't deal with it. We haven't dealt with it because the truth's never come out. They're still lying to us, and we're still kind of ignoring the facts because we feel too uncomfortable about it. When Germany after World War II, they did a phenomenal job of dealing with their history and saying, we did this, let's deal with it. We did it. And that took a lot of courage. And they put in their curriculum, you can't go through as a kid in Germany, you learn about the horrors of the Holocaust, and that your country did this. And I think Germany's a better country now for that. And the people are better for it. And they've been able to, in their own way, heal. And that's a lot of healing that you have to do on that one. But we've never been able to do that. We've never been able to do that because we're constantly lied to. We were lied to from the get-go. And like you said, common sense tells you immediately that, well, wait a minute, this was a major conspiracy. Okay. And the Oswald probably never picked up a gun that day.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's
Fascinating for a different reason too, because now thinking about Germany and how coming to terms with your past and instead of avoiding it or ignoring it, you just say, hey, yeah, we messed up, let's learn from our mistakes, let's move on from this. And but to move on from it, we have to learn from it and acknowledge it. That's kind of, you see with celebrities, right? Like if you apologize for messing up, or an athlete or whatever, like people forgive you pretty quickly and then you can move on from it. But if you keep denying it, I mean, we saw it in baseball, right, with the steroids or whatever. If you keep denying it, like people are going to keep trying to expose you. And it also kind of relates to in America, like this debate about like how much of our slavery and all that type of stuff should be implemented in our schools, right? Like I'm not a huge fan of critical race theory or anything like that, but it kind of makes the argument for them where it's like, okay, as long as there's no other agendas on why you're pushing this, I can kind of see the perspective, and I always try to see things from other perspectives, even if it pushes back against my own views. But it's yeah, I can kind of see the perspective of like, okay, let's acknowledge it for the purpose of like, that way we can kind of just move on. It's the only way you move on from something is acknowledging like, okay, this is a part of our history that we probably that was a mess up that we shouldn't have done. It's a bad, but obviously it's not the whole history. But I think acknowledging things, if it's good or bad or shines a positive or negative light on your country or your culture, that's just something you have to do to get a true perspective on reality. If not, then you kind of live in a illusion of like, okay, let's just highlight the good things we do and ignore all the bad things we do. You talked about Alan Dulles. I mean, his brother, who was a part of the the coups in Latin America,
Yep.
and for United Fruit.
Guatemala. Yep. United Fruit. Yep.
Yeah, so that's where like that term, the Banana Republic, comes from, and all that stuff. So it's like, you know, there's it just all this history is so important, and we should talk about those things, and not to say that like, and there are like two sides of the argument, typically, and usually the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But you have like the side of the argument where you have people who are like, America's always bad and we only do bad things, and then you have the side of America's like, we're always good, and it's like, no, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we should acknowledge all of it. So since the Kennedy assassination, do you think, because this is kind of I guess my perspective on it is like, I kind of feel like there's always been shadow governments and people behind the scenes kind of pulling the strings or influencing things in one way or another, if it's secret societies, if it's elites, if it's whoever it may be, billionaires, but since the JFK assassination, it seems like it was almost like a coup in our own country, where like they took over and now they had more influence. Not to say that they didn't have influence previously, but they even have more influence. And since then, like you said, you could see the wars ramping up. You could see more assassinations. You could see so many other things. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that what happened is they solidified their absolute power. I think that I tell people, I think that John F. Kennedy was our last great hope for world peace. And the things he was doing in especially the last 2 years of his presidency, you can see it, you can hear it in his speeches. You can see he walked the walk. He was having behind the doors conversations with Khrushchev, saying we can't have another Cuban Missile Crisis, and Khrushchev agreed. There was too much at stake. It's millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people can die here. So Kennedy realized, and there were a lot of things that influenced him, including what he was seeing and actually experienced, that it's like, okay, this needs to stop. And he was a threat. The Kennedy family was a threat because Bobby was waiting in the wings. Imagine 8 years of John and then 8 years of Bobby. Think about how different things could have been. But of course, that never happened. And so, yeah, I think that that's one of the things I learned. And then people have to understand this. there is an elitism. There are elites in this country. And when I say elite, it's like this elite blue blood, families go way back, Harvard, Yale educated. When Alan Dulles recruited for the CIA, he recruited almost exclusively from Harvard and Yale. Why? Because those families, the Bush family being one of them, okay, these people were born being told, these kids, you are better than everyone else. You deserve to rule over everyone else, meaning make decisions for everyone. And the masses really don't mean anything. If without us, they would be lost, and we're the best thing for them. We are elite. We are better. And they had that attitude. So that justified a lot of their actions. They thought they were doing it for the best of the country, right? Like, but obviously the ego and greed and all of that. They have so much power and always had so much power. So when I say elites, people say, well, Kennedy family was elite. The Kennedys, their father was a bootlegger, made his money bootlegging. And a lot of the robber barons most certainly made their money illegally, on the backs of others, most certainly. But the Kennedys were Irish Catholic. As far as the elite blue bloods were concerned, Joseph was a bootlegger, and they were upstarts, and they would never be accepted because, again, they were Irish Catholic. And even when you think about that today, just the fact that they weren't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, they could never be in that club. And and at a certain point they had to go because Kennedy and Bobby were just, they were stirring the hornet's nest. I mean, there's no question about that. They were angering a lot of very powerful people. And yeah, so these elitists were like, and I don't know where, behind which closed doors all this happened, who exactly was there. Was it Rockefeller, right? Was it, the Clint Murchisons of the world, the oil guys, right? The Bush family, all these other, you can go, the Dulleses, higher and higher, billionaire, right? Literally from the robber baron generation. He's got to go. The decision was made. He's got to go. We can't risk him winning another election and then Bobby coming in for 8 years. We need Vietnam. He's upsetting the apple cart. We're all going to lose a lot of money. This guy's got to go. And guess what the CIA was really good at back then? Assassinations. they were good. They set all this stuff up. They wanted to do this to Castro. They were training to do this to Castro in Cuba. They had done it to other democratically elected leaders in Central America and Africa. They were great at it. So what they do? They reversed it. They took it in. Said, all right, let's do this. And they knew how to do it. But the one thing they needed more than anything else is they had to control the narrative. So they had to control the mainstream media. Operation Mockingbird, that was a real CIA program. Cord Meyer directed it. That was infiltrating the mainstream media. The CIA was all propaganda. The CIA learned from the Nazis. The CIA learned from Joseph Goebbels. They thought Goebbels was like the gold standard of propaganda. And they used the same tactics. So that's why when Dan Rather got, Oswald, and they do these, and it's still the same nonsense. But then you're like, why aren't you mentioning Ruby? Why aren't you mentioning how ridiculous the magic bullet theory is? Why aren't you mentioning this? Why aren't you mentioning that? A lot of people are saying Oswald is an intelligence agent himself with the CIA. Nothing's ever mentioned. They go back to the same shills and they pay people to go on TV, and they're the same people. Vince Bugliosi, all these people that wrote these books. Oh, case solved. It's Oswald, period. And they actually, in 1967, that's when, in a CIA memo, they created conspiracy theorists. They said, from now on, anyone who goes against the Warren Commission report is to be called and known as a conspiracy theorist. And that they wanted it to be a negative term. They wanted it to be some loony that was wearing a tinfoil hat. And it worked. And that's what it worked. It's worked. And it worked for 60 years. None of those guys ever went to jail. They're all dead now. The problem is the institutions are still here, the CIA, Joint Chiefs, Secret Service. So if it comes out, then I say it's really the CIA more than anything. But if say the CIA had a big hand in the Kennedy assassination, there's a price to pay for that. And like you said, we're forgiving. Just come out with the truth. But now, after all this time of all the nonsense, think about all the people who have died, mysterious deaths since 1963, especially that first 10 years when those people were really witnesses and they were dropping like flies, right? So anyway, yeah, I mean, that's just, it's, again, these people have an enormous amount of power over us. They always have, but the Kennedy assassination absolutely solidified it.
Well, yeah, people my age and younger, I'm turning 38 this year, but they don't know that at that time, having a Catholic president was like unheard of, and people thought the Vatican was going to run the U.S. They're like this was some Vatican operation. Like you said, they also pissed off a lot of people. The famous conflicts with Jimmy Hoffa and Bobby, and I have Italian friends who I'm Portuguese and I live in Massachusetts. I have a lot of Italian friends, and I have some Italian friends that hate Kennedy till this day because they're like, oh, he turned his back on the Italians, this and that. They helped him get elected and all this stuff. And then I'm just like, there's more to that story, and that's kind of a simplified way of looking at it. But yeah, it's just there's so much to it. And then like the Zapruder film, I mean, the fact that didn't come out for a while after, like people don't realize that like that didn't come out immediately, that came out afterwards, and a lot of people believe it was tampered. I've had Sean Stone on the show and others who believe it was tampered and tampered with, that there's some part of it that's missing that might be a clue to where the shot came from or whatnot. And so there's so much of that going on, of just like them silencing anybody who has anything to say. Like I talked about the Jack Ruby video of him talking about this goes to the highest levels. Like, why didn't media jump on that? Why wasn't that on every newspaper? When Oswald is arrested for the first time and he doesn't seem to know why he's arrested, then when he's connecting the dots, he says he's a patsy. Like, why isn't that like headline news? So it's like every conspiracy theory, or every event that there's conspiracies surrounding it, people are always like, why didn't people talk? Why aren't people talking? Why didn't somebody would have said something? And I always say the same thing, like you can always find evidence of witnesses and whistleblowers and people who do talk and do say things, and they have mysterious deaths. They have or nobody wants to talk to them, or they're silenced, or whatever. And that it's not even just with assassinations. That's with like all aspects of conspiracies. I mean, I've gone down the rabbit hole of so many conspiracies, 9/11, whatever it may be, alternative energy, all great documentaries like Gas Hole or Pump, or Who Killed Electric Car. I mean, you can find evidence of silent people being silenced who knew how to run vegetable oil and peanut oil and diesel engines, or people who knew how to get 100 miles per gallon with an engine with a very little modification. Well, I don't know why. Zoom unable to detect camera. Oh, well, you can still hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Yeah, weird. I've zoomed. Well, I'll fix that once I'm done talking. But so there's just so many stories where it's just like you constantly hear the people say, oh, nobody spoke, the OKC bombing, right? Same thing. Like, oh, if there's more to that story, why didn't anybody speak up? And it's like there's always eyewitnesses where they're like, no, I saw more people, or I saw this, or I saw that. And those stories aren't published. And it really goes back to, like you said, the CIA understanding, like, okay, let's label anybody who goes against the mainstream narrative as a conspiracy theorist, as a lunatic, as like, this is this story. Anybody else who says anything otherwise is a crazy person. So that's another one of those things that kind of defines why this story is important, because that really is the beginning of the weaponizing that term.
Correct. And that's how that's modus operandi with propaganda too. Back then, okay, so you control the mainstream media. You don't have to worry about people like Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather. They're going to talk They're going to say whatever you want them to say. So you got that covered. But what about those pesky journalists who aren't going along with that, maybe from a smaller paper, or maybe someone like a Dorothy Kilgallen, who is very well known, right? Who is almost a celebrity journalist with her own column and is on What's My Line every week. And she's the one interviewing Ruby in prison. And she's finding out a lot. And she's telling her friends, her good friends, close friends, that she's going to blow the lid off of this whole thing, that it's nonsense. The Warren Commission report was total nonsense. And then she wound up being found dead in it was a hotel room in New York. I'm not sure, but she was found dead in bed, quote unquote, accidental overdose of barbiturates and alcohol, blah, blah, blah. And all of her notes, extensive notes, that her book, she was writing a book, all of it, that was never found. And that's just one person, one. And after so many, and it's so obvious. And, it's like Richard Belzer wrote that, rest in peace. Belzer was awesome. And he wrote that book about all the mysterious deaths surrounding it. And at a certain point, now some people did die of heart attacks, especially back then in their 40s. That was a thing. I mean, men died, the way they smoked and drank. People died of heart attacks, right? But early, young. But for a journalist who was looking into this, and then he died of a karate chop to the back of the neck while he was coming out of his shower. No one ever looked into that. That's all they got on that. A karate chop. If that's not spycraft, if that's not James Bond stuff right there, right? Some assassin hits him right in the right place in the artery. He's dead. I mean, David Ferry, Mary Pinchot Meyer. The list is extensive, but whistleblowers and truth seekers are always silenced. And it's gone from just killing them outright to now with technology, all they do is they put child pornography on your computer. I knew a couple of whistleblowers. It had nothing to do with Kennedy. It was more, I think it was with some pollution issue and some of these big corporations that were polluting a river. And there was this whistleblower group, and they were looking into it. Well, next thing you know, is a guy, two girls, they all had child porn on their computers. So what happens is immediately, as soon as that, and it's the easiest thing in the world for them to do. I mean, that technology is simple for them. When that happens, 50% of people are going to believe you and 50 aren't. So you just lost your credibility. I could sit there and scream, right? I don't have that. This wasn't me. It doesn't matter. The people, that's the way the human mind works. And again, they understand that whole idea of that mind control, MK Ultra. That was another CIA programs going way back to the 50s, right after World War II. And they got a lot of those scientists who were working on those programs to come here and continue those programs. They were working on those programs in concentration camps, the things they were doing to people. But it's all about, how do you control the human mind? Because if we can control the human mind, we control everything and we don't have to worry about it. So that's why I'm saying, when people are like, oh, how can anyone think it wasn't just Oswald? Because it's this weird, and it offends me. I know it offends you, right? I take it personally, and I take great offense to the fact that they've gotten away with this and that they got it over on a lot of people. But for me, that's why I wrote the book. It's like, you didn't get it over on me. And I'm not going to put my neck out there and start talking about specific theories or this and that. I just wanted to let these people tell those stories. That's what's important. And let people learn and go from there. Because in the end, it's the truth that matters, right? The truth matters. And if we would just, human beings and powerful, egomaniacal, elitist people would just tell the darn truth every now and again, maybe things would be a little better in the world.
Yeah, and I also think it's not just that the truth matters. It's that most people live in a illusion of how the world really works. And this idea, like you mentioned, the elite, like people have a hard time understanding or believing that there is a elite or there is people who want to control others. And I always say this, I'm like, history doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. And you look throughout history, there's always been people, and people want to control those people. Like that's we do not live in a a point in time where that doesn't exist. Like in this world where we've all just figured out how to just live among each other, and there's no one evil in the world, and no one who wants to do harm to other people, or no one who wants to control others. I mean, Alexander the Great. I mean, you go down Genghis Khan. I mean, these were all rulers. These were people who wanted to rule over others. That has always happened. I mean, in the UK, they still have a royal family. It's like in some countries they still have dictatorships. Like we live in like a box where, and it's funny because being a foreigner, I was born in Portugal. It's always fascinating to me because you figure Europeans, because of that history, and because of their history is much longer, so you learn history from your country. If you're raised in Portugal, you learn history of dictate. We had Salazar, which was a dictator when my parents were little and my grandparents were alive. Grew up with Salazar, and it's like it wasn't that long ago. It was just a generation or two ago that you guys were dealing with a dictatorship. And a lot of countries, it wasn't that long ago that they had some type of corrupt government or dictatorship or something. And but yet it seems like America is the first one to push back, even though we don't have that history, which is kind of unique, when you look at that. And I think it's because the ones who did push back came to this country and said, you know what, like we know that European history, we're from Europe, and we're gonna create something new and create a system that maybe can bypass any of that corruption and whatnot. And then of course our system, I think, and some people debate that, like if things were run the way that the founding fathers wanted things to be run, that maybe it would be a much better system. It's not that the system's broken, it's that people have found loopholes in the system. It's kind of like the tax code, right? Like it's like there's always somebody really intelligent that will find little loopholes in the tax code and take advantage of it. So it just, to me, it's important because it's a perfect example of like a undebatable topic. And I think when you're removed from it, because it's a historical event, people have a easier time accepting that the CIA was involved, the mob was involved. And I'm just like, you can't really debate that a democratically elected president of the United States in broad daylight gets shot in the head, and there's all these cover-ups and there's all these other really suspicious things that happen afterwards. I'm like, if that happened then, why do we think that couldn't happen now? Why do we think that those powers that had influence enough and cover that up isn't influencing and covering things up now? And to me, it's fascinating how people, it's almost like, ignorance is bliss. It's like they'd rather not believe that the world is that corrupt and that dark and that scary, and that there's people that evil. You look at the Jeffrey Epstein thing. I've had Nick Bryan on a few times. I've he did the Franklin Scandal book, and he's always doing this topic, and also Philip Fairbanks, who did oh my god, what is the Pedo Primer book, which is really good too. And it's just like, it's another one of those topics where it's like, it's so dark, it's so scary, that when some of it finally gets exposed, like the Jeffrey Epstein story, and he obviously did not kill himself in prison, or at least like people can at least admit that there's something really suspicious about that. They still have a hard time believing that it's not an isolated incident. Like to them, it's like, I think it's about, it shatters their whole worldview, and to them that's scary. So it's like they're much more comfortable kind of being like, okay, it's an isolated incident, things really aren't as scary and as bad as I think they are. Let me just go back to my everyday routine. And I don't know if you know Monica Perez from the Propaganda Report and Deep Dives of Monica. She's awesome. She's been on Mel K's show, and she's been on my show, and she's I know you were on Mel K's show recently. She's a good friend of mine too. And but Monica talked about how like we're like domestic animals, and we like the elite constantly try to keep us domesticated. And it kind of, I'm like, wow, that's a great way of putting it, because it's like it kind of is like a dog or a cat or some domesticated animal, where it's like they have they know, that there's more to the world. They know that there's, but they're told their whole lives, like, listen to your owner, do what I say, that, you don't get out of that box. And anytime some of those instincts come out, you try to tame them down again, like, oh, something's wrong with you, and like us conspiracy theorists or people who push back, we're like that domesticated animal that's like, we don't want to be domesticated. Like, I want to ask questions. I want to know how the world really works. So, and these, again, like, these are all examples of why this story is so important, and why there's so many similarities to the OKC bombing. I don't know where you stand on the OKC bombing or 9/11 or any of these topics, but I think they're all very similar, and you see a lot of parallels with, like, silencing whistleblowers, with mysterious deaths, with all these things. And I think when people realize, like, okay, this isn't a isolated incident, maybe, hopefully you become much more skeptical in the future, which you have to be. Like, the government and the CIA and all these people, it's like they should be guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty. That's the way we should treat them.
Right. And you're right. It's critical thinking. Be critical in your thinking. Be objective. Be a free thinker. Right. We have to raise free thinkers. Here's the problem. And like you said, it just goes down back to Mesopotamia. The first human civilization was all about trying to control people. Human beings, we're born. The minute we're born, we're being indoctrinated. Think about just in this country. I know when I was born, 1965, boy, was I indoctrinated religiously. I was Catholic, Roman Catholic, Italian, Roman Catholic. Oh my. Catechism, the nuns. I was indoctrinated for a reason. There's a reason for that. Then you're indoctrinated by your institutions. Like I said, government as father. We're the good guys. We wear the white hats. Wave the flag. Nationalism, which could be very dangerous. I'm not saying people shouldn't love their countries, but make your country earn your love and respect. Don't just wave a flag. Make your country earn it. And that's the problem, though. Listen, I don't want to lose sight of the Kennedy assassination and the facts and everything surrounding it, right? It's fascinating. That's what we're talking about. I don't want to get into, like, I feel like sometimes, with the idea of human nature and psychology, I'm not a clinical psychologist. That's not my area of expertise. But having spoken to so many people, I can tell you that the human mind and human nature is exactly what we're talking about here the whole time, because that explains everything. It explains everything. And you're right. We have to fight to become. I feel like there's a percentage of people who can't be indoctrinated. And I always thought this would be good for like a movie script. 3% people cannot be indoctrinated, cannot be manipulated. It cannot be, right. You cannot brainwash them. So all these CIA and all the institutions, they can't. Those are the free thinkers. Those are the critical thinkers. Those are the people that you're having on your show. That's you. That's me. And so where are we left? We're left to be like, well, if we say this, I had to be so careful in the book. In the entire introduction, I talk about how all conspiracy theories are not created equal because of the negative connotation of just the conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory. And I said, with the Kennedy I'm not saying the world is flat. I'm saying that Kennedy, it wasn't just Oswald, or maybe not Oswald at all, that killed Kennedy. And it's obvious. There's a big difference. And you're right. Like, listen, I spoke to some people who wanted to get into, because that's their personality, right? They're like, yeah, 9/11 and Oklahoma. And it's mentioned in the book. It is in the book. I kept some, so a couple people mention it because it goes back to cognitive dissonance. It goes back to, whoa, I don't want to think that our government had anything to do with flying passenger planes or letting it happen or demolishing the World Trade Center. I can't handle that at all. If you thought the Kennedy assassination was bad, that's way darker. There's no way they want to have anything to do thinking that our government would actually do that. Yet false flag events are not conspiracy theories. Like, for the most part, history has shown that that false flag events have been real, right? So, and you look at that almost starting every war, certainly in the 20th century, whether it was the Gulf of Tonkin or whatever, it was like, well, it's a false flag event because they need that. They need that critical mass of support in order to say, okay, we're going to war. We're gonna make billions of dollars. Your children are gonna die, but we want you to feel good about it. So they attacked us. I mean, and here's the human mind, right? Be like, oh yeah, they attacked us. Look, Dan Rather said so. And so, and that's it. That's all it takes, because we're easily manipulated. And I know it's a bummer to say that. It's a bummer. But we have to all be better about not being manipulated and being critical thinkers no matter what.
Without a doubt. And have you followed some of the FOIA released documents, and have you found anything really, like we talked about before, a lot of these redacted documents, a lot of it's still blacked out or whatnot, but is there anything that really popped out at you that you're like, okay, well, there's a interesting discovery, or maybe that's a piece to the puzzle that we didn't have before?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that was stood out to me, Jefferson Morley, who I interviewed for the book, he recently came out, and this was timing that I didn't know was going to happen. The book had already come out, and then he came out, and there was this big thing. It was almost a little bit of the mainstream media carried it for a day, right? And then you couldn't find it anymore. But Jefferson Morley came out saying that there was he had found documentation relating to, I think it was this still classified covert operation that was approved by the CIA months before the Kennedy assassination. And the documentation kind of showed that the agency used Oswald for intelligence purposes. So although a lot of us already know, it's obvious that Oswald was an intelligence agent, worked for the CIA, this proves more that he worked for the CIA. And it was all about, I think, I want to say it had to do with the infiltrating in Miami, these Cuban exiles and the things they were doing. And the CIA had a couple programs, COINTELPRO, and a couple other things that they were manipulating the narrative on how that was all going to work. And because they originally wanted to blame the assassination on Castro. But I think then they realized, well, then that could really start a problem. So they said, well, let's just blame it on Oswald, who, by the way, was sheep dipped in New Orleans handing out pro-Castro flyers, right? So they were all working it, right? That whole leading up to it. But these documents, now I don't know where that stands. I don't know where Jefferson, I hadn't heard anything about that in probably a month or so. So, but the documents are coming out slowly but surely. But here's what I say to that. Do you really think the CIA is going to release documents that aren't redacted that say, hey, we killed Kennedy, that act, not to that, but say, there's some memos, and it's obvious they had something to do with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I don't think that's ever going to happen. So when these documents come out, yeah, we might learn more and more about Oswald working for the CIA. And then maybe over time, more time, people will be like, well, it wasn't just Oswald. But by the time, if ever, the whole truth comes out, the people involved are going to be dead and buried for 100 and 150 years. I mean, it's going to be so long, so far removed, So I just say, because people get upset when I say that, but that's like, I don't think, what are we going to find out now? People have come out. It's like, I was behind the grassy knoll. I was the guy. No one believes them. They're in prison, right? The James Files thing. And then sometimes they are wackadoos and they do lie. And so you can never know who's who. You're never going to find that out at this point. But we can do is look at this critically and say, yep, something's rotten in the state of Denmark, and we need to remedy this from the standpoint of, we need to be better. We need to be a better country. We need to be a better government. We need to start holding people accountable in a major way. Otherwise, we're never going to be that America that was Camelot, that was 1960, early 1960s, right? Where we were exceptional. We're not exceptional anymore. We're not. And we have to come to terms with that in order to maybe become exceptional again.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I just look back at how, to me, like the fact that people still need documents to kind of prove that the CIA was involved. I mean, Alan Dulles gets fired after the Bay of Pigs and then gets put on the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination of the guy who just fired him. Like, really? Like, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, to me, it's like
Yeah.
it's insane. I don't know how much time you have. If you don't have a lot of time, I know that there's another topic I'd love to get into a little bit that you've done some work on. I could have you on again to talk about it. But this is kind of reminding me a little bit of the UFO stuff that's going on, right? The government covering up documents, not releasing stuff, giving us bits and pieces, not understanding what's a psyop, what's not a psyop. That's the really confusing part. It's like when the government wouldn't admit it, like some people were more on board thinking it was something, and then when the government admitted, they're like, okay, now I think it's psyop. It's like, well, it does get confusing because now it's like, wait, why are they admitting this now? So that is a topic you've written a book on, and right, and I believe so, and
Yes,
you go into a little bit.
Yeah, I wrote a book. We made a documentary series. I'm part of a production company, and we made 3 documentaries on that topic, kind of UFO/disclosure, if you will. But then we kind of take people on this journey through the documentaries. And of course, would love to talk about it more at length with you whenever you'd like. But yes, but again, it's the same thing. It's cover up, immediately cover up. It's what happened in 1947 in Roswell, where they actually say a UFO crashed. In the paper, they're admitting it. And then all of a sudden the story changes. Once some of the higher brass get involved, oh no, it's a weather balloon. The guy holding up a piece of tin foil. And we're supposed to believe this, right? And again, critical thinking. A lot of people, and this is harder, I get it, because yeah, we could believe obviously there's life in the universe. I think we are all aware of the nature of the universe now and how big it is, right? And when we see the numbers, there's no question about it. I think for people, there's 2 things. One, do these civilizations have the type of technology that can get them here? Whether it's bending space-time, right? Because light years, it would take too long. But apparently, and it could be interdimensional as well, different layers of dimension. So there's a lot of that, and there's quantum physics involved. So immediately people are like, whoa, 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 like they just can't, if you can't wrap your head around it at point A and B, you're definitely not going to wrap your head around it at point X, Y, and Z. So that's the issue with that. There's a lot of very high level technology associated and or metaphysical interdimensional stuff that's involved in the UFO phenomena. But what do we know? We know that people forever have been seeing this. And certainly right after World War II, we dropped the bombs. All of a sudden, it's the modern era of UFOs begins in earnest, right? People seeing these craft, these discs, flying discs. And then then it leads into abduction, right? All of a sudden, Betty and Barney Hill in the late 60s. And it's like, what's going on here? The book I wrote, it's ironic, but it took place during the Cold War. And in 1967, these 2 cousins, they were radar operators in Miami and Key West, respectively. And one night they were on the phone because they had some nurses they were flirting with or something. They tell this story. All of a sudden, the one guy in Miami is like, I gotta go. Well, they started to, on radar, they were watching these objects come down from the Arctic Circle, going like 5,000 miles an hour, which of course, especially back then, none of our aircraft can do that. And we had to assume it might be the Russians. So we went on red alert because it was the Cold War. So, but they didn't have that. No one had that. So they're doing the same thing. So we're scrambling jets in Miami because they come all the way down there. And then the Cubans are scrambling jets. Anyway, long story short, there's physical, tangible evidence and incredible eyewitness testimony from credible people like in the military that have talked about this forever, but it all comes down to the same thing, whether it's Kennedy assassination, whether it's controlling the narrative. The people high up or what at whatever level, someone knows about the truth about the UFO and the existence of ETs and that whatever communication they've had with us, interaction. But they don't want us to know. They started covering up from the get-go. And now it's like, how do you all of a sudden say, whoops, well, we covered it up, but now we think you're mature enough to handle it. That's what they would basically have to say to us. So they got to keep covering it up. And I always say, well, do you think disclosure's coming? And I'm like, nope. I think the only disclosures comes from us. And it comes individually where one person and another person says, you know what? It's real. Whether I've had an experience or I know for a fact, this is what I believe. And then you get to that critical mass, and that's the only way or the ETs themselves say, hey, enough of this. We're coming out. Right. So again, I don't mean to go on and on about that, but I know you're interested in it. But again, the connection to JFK is control the narrative, lie, cover up. Cover up, cover up, cover up, cover up. No one can ever really know the truth. Why?
Well, there's the parallels also are look at Trump, obviously close relations with the Roger Stone, both very intrigued with the JFK assassinations. When in the office, when he became president, had these intentions to release, the files and get to the bottom of this, and they didn't have the power to do so. Clinton also notoriously had interest in UFOs, gets in office, wants to learn more about it, doesn't release anything. So it's like there's levels to power, and we think that the president is at the pinnacle of power when really what he is, he's a PR guy, he's a spokesperson, he's and he's at a need to know level where like they don't tell him everything. I mean, we've been talking about the JFK assassination, the Bay of Pigs. JFK didn't know about that. That's why he didn't want any involvement in it. It was he's like, no, I'm not. He's like, you guys had this plan of doing this. I'm not going to give you any help. And then that's why it kind of turned into a disaster. And so it's very fascinating, and it opens so many other rabbit holes, because the thing that I find so fascinating about this is that I heard Eric Weinstein say this recently, and he made a really valid point. He was talking about how technology has not evolved that quickly, and how and I'm just most of us would be like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, we had pagers, we had phone, and now we have the internet, we have this, and we're making it. But then he made a really valid point. He's like, take away computer technology, he's like, that's the only thing that's evolved really fast and quickly. You take away computers, he's like, technology has not evolved. So our comprehension of like how somebody could like break the speed of light, and somebody could have a different interpretation of time and all and dimensions and all this other stuff, like it's beyond our understanding, because our technology is evolving so slow in regards to those things. And when it comes down to travel, it's like we haven't done anything revolutionary. We haven't done, it's not like we can't transport or teleport somewhere or anything like that. So our interpretation of what's possible, it's just based on what our technology, what we have now, and our understanding. But this goes into, that's why I think like all these things kind of get connected at some point or cross paths. Is like, you look at the Nikolai Tesla, and that famous quote where he says like, the three things you need to know to understand the world is like vibration, sound, and something else. It's like things that like we don't even spend any time really exploring, but those things could be important in regards to understanding how the pyramids were built, what type of old wisdom or technology did they have access to, or did somebody share with them? There's so much undiscovered stuff. And then when you look at the pushback, right, like Graham Hancock in his documentary series, American, what was it, something apocalypse, American apocalypse, or whatever, ancient apocalypse, and ancient. Like all the pushback, and I'm like, wait. Like, he's talking about stuff that happened a long time ago. And why are you guys so upset about having a alternative theory? Are you trying to suppress people from opening up their minds to what, to basically looking at history completely different, that maybe we're not as advanced in some aspects of maybe time or pulse or vibrations than we think, and maybe civilizations previously were more advanced and understood those things better than we did, or maybe they got information from some other civilization somewhere else. You look at the story of Atlantis, you look at something that I'm sure the listeners are tired of me talking about, but I find so fascinating is Randall Carlson was just on the Rogan podcast again, not too long ago. He was on, the last one that was posted was late 2022, and he talked about doing work with this guy Malcolm, who has basically cracked the code for anti-gravity and all these other things, and it connects the dots to potentially how the pyramids were built and some of the technology they used to build these things. And he's like, but I can't talk about it now. And this guy Malcolm's like this billionaire business guy who has all this money to invest in this, and then he's like, I'll come back and talk about it. Well, Randall Carlson and Malcolm comes back, records a podcast on the Joe Rogan podcast. There's on Malcolm's Twitter, there's a video of him at the studio and all the stuff. Rogan won't release the episode. Says it's too controversial. The guy has had, people from the right, people from the left, people that have been banned on every platform on the show. How can somebody who has a alternative view of history and maybe has some technology, has cracked the code for something, why would that be too controversial to post? To me, it's like, would it change our whole worldview on how we look at time and space and dimensions and traveling and all these things? Is it, did somebody contact him? There's something really fascinating about that. But I feel like these things are all connected, because our understanding, when we see a UFO or when we see something we can't explain, like the way it's traveling, it's all based on our understanding of the world. Well, what we have to open our minds to is that, like, there could be things that we have that we think we understand about the world that could be completely wrong. We might look at us now in like 100 years, 200 years or whatever, and say we were completely wrong with the way we thought gravity worked or time worked or space worked or whatever, all these things. And so I find this stuff super fascinating and somewhat, connected in regards to like just covering up so we can stay domesticated, basically.
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned earlier about technology, it's so true. It's like with computers, microchips, all this AI, yet we're still dependent on fossil fuels. I wonder why, right? Power, money. Like they don't want it. I think that technology definitely exists. I think that free energy existed. Tesla, go back. It exists. It's out there, but it's not mainstream. It's not in commercial use because it does not free, right? It's free energy. Think about how it would unburden so many of us, the third world countries. People, there's this phenomenal documentary. It's called Thrive. Came out years ago, but it's about how everyone on this planet should be thriving, and yet only 5% of the entire planet, if that, are thriving. Why is that? It's because of the control, right? So yeah, you have there's no way we should be, and then that's where the propaganda and manipulation comes in. Somehow people still think it's better for us to be working in coal mines and using coal than to use free energy because of whatever, again, how you can spin it any way you want, right? Well, they'll lose jobs. Yeah, they'll get other jobs. That's been happening since the beginning of time, right? I used to work for magazines and newspapers. Well, they went away. Guess what? It went digital. I had to adjust. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's incredible, and the technology thing, it makes you wonder. And it also, one of the things you said is very interesting. It doesn't matter. It's so true. Presidents are figureheads. There are presidents. It doesn't matter if they're Republican, Democrat, but there are people above them want us They want us to fight and argue and be divided over Republican, Democrat, this president, that president. Doesn't matter. We learned with Kennedy. Doesn't matter at all. What, Kennedy was the president. He thought he had the power to change things, and he did not. So I'll tell you this real quick. I tell people to try to find this clip when Obama won, when he first was elected. How there was like this. It was all exciting for him, and and he had all this energy, and he was going to change things, blah blah blah. And then he had that meeting that they have where it's a transfer of power meeting, where so the Bush administration and then his people went into the meeting, closed doors. I don't know who else was back there. I remember watching the news when he came out. They wanted to interview him. It's like, oh, how'd that go? I'm telling you, that man aged 10 years. He had gray hair that I did not see the day before. And he was shaken to the core. I said, I remember watching this and being like, do you see this guy? What in the world? I honestly think they showed him the Zapruder film. I think they show every new president the Zapruder film.
Isn't that a Bill?
No matter who it is,
right? There's a Bill Hicks joke about that. About once you become president, they take you to a dark room and they show you a angle of the JFK assassination that shows that the Secret Service or CIA killed him, and then they're like, "Hey, do you have any questions?" Like the CIA.
But it's true, because then they're like, "Okay, I'll do whatever you want me to do." All of a sudden, that whether it's Trump or Clinton or whoever, it's like, okay, forget about the UFO stuff. I'll delay it more. I'll delay it. I'll make sure those never come out because everyone's waiting for those documents. It's like, never happens. Biden now, same thing. Because again, they're like, yeah, they don't run things. They don't really control things. So yeah, it's hard. It's frustrating beyond belief. And that was one of the things when I wrote the book. It was hard to write. It was fun to write, and it was really I learned so much, and it was a great journey, but it was also sad because I realized that, okay, this book will help people. It'll inform them. They can, go from here. It's like a springboard to read other things and find out more. But are we ever going to get to the bottom of this? I don't know. I think we already have, but I should say officially get to the bottom of it, where it comes out officially. I don't know. And that's a tough one to swallow because it's like, well, what do we do? What do we do as a country? Where do we go from here?
Well, I will tell people it is if you haven't gone down that rabbit hole, it helps you understand so many other things. And there's so many connections to other characters that will help you connect the dots with history and, all these other things. I had Russ Baker on. I remember years ago when to talk about Family of Secrets, his book about the Bushes, and he talks about the JFK assassination. Like, you could have books, so many things are connected to the JFK assassination that you could write a book about a completely different other topic, and there's connections there, just like the Bush family and Bush Senior and all that stuff. So very fascinating for people listening who want to know where they can get the book. Where's the best place to get the book, and also look at your other work. Also, let people know your what your documentary series is on UFOs and where they can stream that, watch it, purchase it, any of that stuff, any social media platforms you're on. Just let people know how they can get your work.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the book is available on, Amazon is always probably the easiest place to get it. But it's also available with other booksellers. It's Killing Kennedy: Exposing the Plot, the Cover-Up, and the Consequences. And it's also, I have a site. It's jackrotauthor.com. And on there there's links to not only Amazon, but Barnes and Noble and where else you can, wherever else you can get the book. And then I have I'm also linking all of these interviews I'm doing for shows like yours on there as well. So people can go and listen to it if they missed it or they haven't seen it. So, and also on there, I have a couple other books like the one we discussed, and then also the documentary series where you can find that. We have worldwide distribution for those documentaries, so that streaming, pay-per-view, on demand. There's different ways you can see them, but they're all extraordinary. We because it's a trilogy, it's extraordinary, 3 parts, and it's extraordinary the Stan Romanek story, extraordinary the seeding, and extraordinary the revelations. And it takes people through the whole on this journey and I think that's a really good when you're done watching all three, I think you're in a really good place to better understand the UFO phenomena as it is. So yeah, you can get the books and those there. Yeah, it, this is it's been a great journey, man. But I noticed that on shows, like they'll always get to the point where the host and I are like, nah, it's kind of a bummer how things are. Like, it's like, will we ever get to where we want to get, which is the truth, disclosure, whatever it is on, right? And it's just this constant battle,
It is.
but we got to fight the good fight.
Yeah, but I think it's worth fighting. I'm a big believer of the ripple effect idea and concept. That's why I named the show the Ripple Effect. I think that conversations like this could inspire people to go down these rabbit holes, learn some new things, maybe rethink things they thought they knew, and that can lead to many other things. That could lead to some kid who's listening to this podcast could eventually end up being the next great JFK researcher who declassifies a bunch of stuff or whatnot. But also we're kind of all chipping away at that mainstream narrative and that worldview that they want us to have, and we're all contributing to that. Somebody might have not gone down the JFK rabbit hole, or maybe hasn't in a long time, and they're like, you know what, yeah, maybe I should start researching that again, or maybe I should read some books, or maybe I should purchase this one, and now that I understand the importance of the event, and in a way, I think we're winning, because there's a lot of people who now are kind of, it's funny because we went like quickly from like the debate about what happened with the JFK assassination to people being like, yeah, we kind of know the CIA did it and the mob did it and the government was involved, and there's a cover up, and it's like we went from like the where people would still have these strong opinions to now I think the average person and the majority of people can at least come to the conclusion that there's more than what we've been told, and there's something more to the story than just the official story. So, which I think is an improvement. Same thing with the UFO story. I think people are much more open-minded to this stuff. I think people are, I remember growing up like saying that I believed in UFOs. I'm like, I think it's kind of ignorant to think that we're the only living species, or and that people can't travel. I mean, like our understanding of the world is based on our technology and how we live, but it doesn't mean that there's not some possible way of traveling that we don't understand. And people look at me like I'm crazy, and I'm just like, okay. I'm like, and now it's not just people like you and I having these discussions. Like the average person is becoming much more open-minded. So in a way, I think these discussions, your documentaries, your books, people willing to openly have these talks, and not worried about the way we're going to get, be looked at. I think it's all contributing to people kind of opening their minds and opening their eyes. I am still skeptical on why the government is openly discussing it. That's always, and again, like somebody like you and I who have done deep dives in historical events, like everything seems to be motivated by something else. So I'm always like, okay, well, what's the motivation? I'm sure you've thought about that too, right?
Absolutely. You get to a point where you absolutely don't trust anyone or anything, and you definitely don't trust authority. And that's because you shouldn't trust authority, right? Like you said, they have to earn it. They should be guilty until proven innocent in those cases where it's these huge institutions. Yeah, why? Because that's control. They want to control us. So why should I believe anything they say? Unless they had a track record of telling the truth. If they were Gandhi or Jesus or someone like, or Mother Teresa, where they acted like that and all the time and treated other human beings that way, well, yeah, I believe them. But based on their track record, why would we believe a word they say?
So them openly talking about it, has it affected your point of view on UFOs and the possibilities of them? Have you like, how has it affected your perspective on it?
Well, yeah, and again, I think when you go down the rabbit hole, we had some things happen to us, and we can talk about this. And I don't know how much time you have, but I'll keep it brief. But so you have experiences, and I always think once a person has an experience, they become a believer, right? If you see a disc in the sky, that's obviously not a helicopter. It's like, that UFOs exist. it's an unidentified flying object. You don't know what it is, but you know it's not conventional. So now you're thinking, is it military or is it ET, extraterrestrial? So you have that. There's the way I look at it is you have, I always believed, I remember when I was a kid, I used to read UFO Report. And I remember one of the first things I ever read, and this was in the early 70s, was the Betty and Barney Hill case. And that really affected me. I'm like, oh my God. Like, and I always used to be fascinated with the daylight discs and those photos they would take of the old daylight discs. And I'm like, wow, because that was so, and back then no one had that technology, not even close. So like, it's like these amazing, and you see them in daylight, right? So that to me was a big deal. But after doing the documentaries, and we interviewed military people who were in top secret programs who came out and told us and were crying on camera, emotional on camera, talking about the program they were involved in. One was crash recovery and crash retrieval. So when these things would crash, they would be the first ones there. And he had the ability to speak telepathically, which is why they have certain people on these specific teams. And this all military. And so he would go and it said he started crying because he would be like, I was looking at dead ET bodies and one was injured trying to talk to me telepathically. But he's, talks about how it affected his life because he could never tell anyone. He couldn't tell his wife. He couldn't tell his kids. It was so and they threaten you, man. I mean, it is 20 years at Leavenworth is the best thing that can happen to you if you ever say anything. Okay. Because it's ugly, right? You better not talk about it. So these people are terrified, which is only why, because with these other guys in the book I wrote, they're now in their 70s and 80s. They don't care anymore. They're tired of keeping it quiet. They're tired of it. They're mad. They're mad at the military for making them keep quiet. So yeah, to get back to your question, there's no doubt in my mind that the UFO phenomenon is real and that it is a good amount of it is ET. Now, a lot of it today could be actual military craft that has been reverse engineered because, like you said, the technology we're seeing is far beyond what the technology we're using on Amtrak at this point. So, we're antiquated, right? So, but yeah, it exists. There has been contact. I don't know where it's leading. I think there's certainly more than one ET race involved. And we just have to keep doing the work on our end to try to get people to understand this and hopefully hope that one day it all ends well and that the benevolent entities and the people who want good for mankind and want us to evolve into our next step of our evolution the right way, hopefully that prevails. And one day we'll be these galactic neighbors, right? We'll be out there with others. It's Star Trek, man. Right. And it's beautiful and it's amazing, but we got to get past, we're not there yet. And we're at a critical point right now. And that's why I think all this disclosure is so important in order for us to evolve into our next step of whatever our evolution is going to be. We got to get past JFK. We got to get past all this and understand who these people were and why they did what we did and learn from that and not do that over and over again. And then maybe one day when all this happens, we can all thrive and have free energy and be galactic neighbors, right? With other incredible civilizations who have already gone what we've been through and have gotten past it. That's my hope. I know that's very Frank Capra-ish, but very, optimistic. But ultimately, I think that's where we're headed.
I think your next book should be called From Assassinations to Aliens, because I think because very few people are expert in both. It's like,
yeah, I know. It's weird how my path is gone. But you know what though? What do we talk about here? We're talking about being critical thinkers. So if you're a critical thinker, it's a natural path because you're like, well, that bothers me because I know that's not true. Kennedy, that perfect example, and important, very important. UFOs, very important, right? What's like is there other life in the universe, right? What happens when we die? Like, these are the most important questions we can be asking. But we're so indoctrinated and brainwashed as people. I know people who went to the premiere of our first documentary, and this one woman said, swear to God, she's a friend of ours. She goes, I've never thought of that. She was in her 40s. And I'm like, you never thought of what? And she's like, UFOs, ETs, life on other planets. I'm like, you've never thought about it? Like, I honestly almost fell down. I couldn't. I was like, what do you mean you've never thought about it?
But don't you think that's by design? Like
It is by design.
I've had
Yeah.
people on my show, and like I've had Michael Millerman, who he was the first person to translate Alexander Dugin's books from who some people call Putin's brain. He's they say one of the most dangerous philosophers. But Alexander Dugin, I find him very fascinating because him and Michael Millerman, they they have this perspective that one of the reasons why countries like Russia and that culture is a danger to the West isn't just geopolitical things, but it could be because of removing spirit, like they want to remove spirituality. And when you look at like Russian culture, they still find that very important. And it's in what I found, and it's funny because I have a very similar story to you. I was raised Catholic, and as a critical thinker and somebody who questioned everything, I felt like religion put me in a box and told me not to question things. And if something doesn't make sense, just accept it as is. And I didn't like that. So I pushed back. But now I can kind of see how like the need for philosophy, spirituality, religion, obviously there's some bad things that come with those things. But the good thing is it does kind of force you to get out of that materialistic world of like, I go to work, I pay my bills, I do my chores, and then I move on, and I never ask those bigger questions. I know many friends of mine that, some Polish friends, Italian friends, whoever, whatever it may be, who Portuguese friends who go to church. And, I don't go to church, but I wonder, I'm like, that's probably the people like you and I, like we ponder on these things all the time. But these people, like that hour at church on Sunday where they're talking about the afterlife, when they're talking about these things that maybe can't be explained, that might be the only time in their life that they're kind of forced to or inspired to think about these things. And so I'm curious, I'm always wondering, like, okay, is that a part of the plan to remove spirituality, remove religion, not because any other reason, but to keep us in the material realm and not ask these bigger questions?
Yeah, and even that with I get this all the time because my other book is about the ghost soldiers of Gettysburg. It's about hauntings and I interviewed a bunch of people for that. So I got it all covered. The whole like it was all these important questions to me, and those to me are the most important things we can know about. But I think you're right. Even when you do talk to people, I talk I'll talk to Christian people about ghosts, and I'll say, well, you're spiritual. You go to church every Sunday. You believe in ghosts, right? Oh, that's blasphemous. It's evil. It's all demons. I'm like, what? Like, so even that is skewed one way. It's skewed for fear purposes. It's all become about fear and control, right? So you want them to think, right? It's like, well, it's the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, right? And they can't answer that. They're like, well, all ghosts are, that's the devil's work. I'm like, no, we're all spirits. It's metaphysical. It's all metaphysical in nature. We're spiritual beings in a physical body. That's all this is. There's something. Consciousness survives death. Can you prove it? No, I can't prove it, but I know it. I tell people that. I mean, it's true. It's like consciousness survives death. I've had enough experiences in that area to say that you have intelligent communication with someone who's not living. Right? Well, what does that say? It says consciousness, or part of our consciousness, survives death. But I think when you go to organized religion, it becomes very black and white. So, you don't want to deal with ghosts. Why? That's what we go to. Don't you believe in heaven? Isn't that what heaven is? Like we go to heaven. That's our spirits go to heaven. And why wouldn't you believe in the spirit? It makes no sense. But like, again, cognitive dissonance, fear, right? The human mind, how it works, our ego. that gets in the way of truth. So, you know, we're just indoctrinated that 1 hour every Sunday, and that's it, you know, and we don't go any further than that. And there are people who don't want to go any further. They don't want to think more about it. They just want to be told what the deal is and not think about it ever again.
That's a really good point. Like I kept looking at going to church on a Sunday, asking these bigger questions as a way to inspire people into ponder, you know, to ponder these ideas and these bigger questions. But that's me. That's me putting myself in that situation. But like you said, there's a lot of people who just want to be told what the truth is or what the world is, and maybe they don't even want to establish or explore their own ideas. They want to just digest somebody else's ideas. And so you have this expert, you know, which we've seen a lot in the medical field and science and all these other things. These experts a lot of times just want to control the information. And same thing with the churches, you know. So I can see it from like that perspective too, where it's just like, okay, maybe some people will get off track and explore these thoughts and go further, but most people will just be like, okay, I'm just going to digest what the priest tells me at church, and I'm not going to go any further than that. I'm just going to, you know, just listen to him and that's it. And yeah, that makes sense, but I'm not going to dive any deeper into it. So you could still be restricted, you know, doing that. And yeah, these are all super fascinating. And when you look at like, you know, Nikolai Tesla, and like when he passed away in that hotel room or motel room, whatever he was at, and the FBI comes in and takes all his paperwork, and you look at the Bob Lazar story, you look at all this stuff, like it's just there's definitely something we're not being told. And there, you know, the fact that all these years later, we still don't have a accepted understanding on how those pyramids were built, which it's so precise, and some of them have make noises, you know, tones that we don't, you know, when you're standing, I forget which one, you stand outside of it, you can hear a tone. It's just insane. Like it's a understanding of sound that we, you know, and you see, I've had Dr. Tom Cowan on my show a few times, and he's the first one to really spark my interest in water. And like we look at water like it's not intelligent, it's just a thing. And then he would bring up these experiments they've done with like crystallizing water, freezing water, and based on the type of music you're playing during the process will change the way the crystals look. And also like these videos of like tones and different sounds changing how water comes out of a faucet, it like spins and all, you know. So it's like, you know, look at the placebo effect. We still don't understand how the placebo effect works, you know. So there's, you know, there's this idea, this arrogance that comes with just like the experts who think they have it all figured out. And we need to question those things, you know. We need to question everything. And like you said, it does get difficult because now you start questioning the official story, the alternative stories. Next thing you know, you're just, you know, you're in a world of questions with no answers. But I think as we get older, we understand that there are more questions than there are answers.
Right. And the more we know, right. And the more we do, and the more we know, and the more we learn, then the more we don't know, right? It's like, wow, okay. And it does work that way. But I'd rather be there. I'd rather be there than not there, you know, and say, okay, I still have all these questions, and I don't know if I've done any good at all, because that's good. That motivates us, right? It's like, oh, I got to write another book. I got to make more documentaries. I'm not going to stop. I'm not. It's almost like a legacy I want to leave my son. Not it's not there's not a lot of money in this, you know. It's not a ton. It's not like, you know, but what I'm leaving is this legacy of truth. This idea that you have to do this work. This is the important stuff, because this is waking people up. This is trying to make the world a better place, trying to make for a better quality of life for everyone, not just blue blood elites, for every human being on the planet, you know, because we're all connected. We're all connected. So what are we doing? Why does the ego separate us like it does? Right. And that's what we're trying to fix constantly. And then, you know, we talk about these things and we get caught up in the minutia. We all do. All right. Who was behind the grassy knoll? And, you know, what kind of gun did he use? And what was his, that happens all the time. Right. So you get into the minutia of certain things, but it all comes back to that 30,000 foot view of human nature. humanity. Who are we? Why do we do this? Why is our history the way it is? And
Well,
have we evolved?
yeah, and it's interesting because it is all human nature. It's human nature to ask those questions, and then there's human nature in those in power to suppress us from asking those questions and
Right.
distract us so we don't ask those questions because then we're easier to control. And religion, I mean, I know Zeitgeist, the movie, gets a lot of there's some people love it, some people hate it, but I think the first one was very important because it did show how historically, religion, false flag events, there's always been people trying to control people, and these things are just tools. It's not to say that religion is always bad. A lot of times people who use it to control people aren't really religious in the first place. The hijackers on September 11th were at like a strip club the night before. They don't seem like really strict Muslims, getting drunk, so it's like a lot of times people use these things to control others. But we do have to break through that and like you said, question absolutely everything and ask these bigger questions. That's why I love these discussions, because I think, too many people do get caught up in the everyday life of, we're very much creatures of habit. We go to the gym, we pick up the kids, we make dinner, we do this, we do that. And then you never sit and just ponder on things. And I think leisure time is really important because there's businessmen, people who talk about how you need employees who have leisure time, because if you're constantly busy, you don't come up with great ideas. Like your best ideas come to you when you're in the shower, when you're going for a walk, maybe when you're cutting the grass, when you're doing something that doesn't require too much focus on one thing, and you can kind of just let your mind wander. Or sometimes, like some writers and others, like, they do psychedelics, or they, back in the day, journalists and writers used to smoke cigarettes, like the little nicotine buzz used to help you write. So I think it really is, like, whatever method you use, like, it is important to kind of break out of this routine, not just physically but mentally, this routine of kind of always running in place and thinking of the same things in the same way, and exploring new thoughts. So without a doubt, thank you so much for all the work you do. Sorry for holding you up for so long. This has been an amazing conversation, and I'll put all your links in the show description. So please, people, check out the documentaries, check out the book, and hopefully we'll have you on again. I host another show with Sam Tripoli from Tinfoil Hat Podcast, Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, and Midnight Mike, and that's called The Union of the Unwanted, and we bring in Mel K's been on it a bunch, and I'm sure other people but we're constantly just bringing in different guests and just having like roundtable discussions. But you'd be a great addition to that, because these are all topics that we discuss with a roundtable panel, and kind of bounce ideas and research off each other. So I'll definitely stay in touch and throw you an invite for the next one of those. And like I said, thank you so much for your time. I'll put all the links in the show description. I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live, and hopefully we talk again in the near future.
I'd love to. I've really, really enjoyed this. This was a great conversation, and it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I hope so. I'm all for it. I'd love to chat with you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Hey, enjoy the rest of your day. And like I said, we'll keep in touch.
Thanks. Okay. Take care.